So there's lots under the hood that we haven't disclosed yet that it's kind of our secret sauce, if that makes sense. I think there is a lot of upside. We don't release just sort of garbage stuff. It's meaningful technical progress. We're making very fast progress. I find that a lot of companies will use that as a trick word to make, their designs seem better. We're a legit company with a very deep aerospace and operational background. We are making this happen. Technology is likely to work at the full scale.
Hey, how
Hi,
are you, Brandon?
Nimitan, how are you?
Great, great. Thank you so much for taking this call and jumping on.
Oh, and I have all the time in the world for you, my friend. Thank you for doing what you do as well. Let me go get my notes. I took some notes in preparation for this. I just got off an engineering meeting, so I gotta run. I'll be back in 1 minute if that's okay.
Take all the time you need.
Thank you, sir. You'd think I would embrace like new school stuff, but like it's carved into me. It's old school. You can't see it, but it's an old school like notebook that I write in. Do something about it.
Don't worry, I'm the same way. I'm a web developer. I should embrace new stuff. And look, I'm using sticky notes on the walls still.
There's something I think probably like from a neuroscience perspective, there's something that probably is engaged when you're forced to write it down painfully slowly instead of typing it out quickly. And it's such a slow process that your brain has a chance to maybe form sort of some sort of logical loop while you're writing it out and maybe refine the idea as you're kind of writing it, in an old school way. I'm not sure. Just a hypothesis, but you never know.
No, I love it. I actually did not have this. I had so many questions planned, and this was not one of them. But you know what? We'll just jump right in. One of them was really how'd you develop this sort of entrepreneurial mentality coming from a fighter pilot jet background? A lot of the things you say is very much like what people in Silicon Valley say, and you have kind of this, move fast and break things mentality is what it seems like. Whereas, like you're jumping into flight rather than actually uh, doing it in 3 years in simulation and all sorts of examples. I mean, but I'll let you go about that. Where'd you get that spirit from?
Well, I think all I want to do is do the thing that makes the most sense. And I've had the good fortune, I've always been interested in business and engineering both together. And I've never really got to flex either set of muscles in the Air Force other than, and I was involved in some test programs just at a very sort of low level in the Air Force from an engineering perspective. And of course, understanding the jet and how it works is really neat. And on the business side, I've just, I've always had that interest in, for whatever reason, in looking at, startups and how Elon does things and how different folks do different things and have different philosophies of meetings and going fast and, moving into the real world to kind of test things and break them and fix them. And what I've realized over time is that there is some logical validity to, a Pareto distribution of work when it comes to designing something. Because when you build it, setting, it's a completely different set of skills. Something can look really fancy in the computer, but when you build it, it forces you to go through materials selection and refinement. If it's 3D printing, you're seeing what the humidity levels are in the place that you print it, and it might shrink or expand. All sorts of unique considerations that you would never have thought of when you build it. Tolerances come into play and are tested in terms of stacking up different tolerances in a linear fashion in certain systems when you actually have to produce and assemble things. It never goes the way you would like. And so you get to the point, if you over-engineer it in the computer, it gets to the point where you're just wasting time and not being very efficient because, those changes are going to negatively impact some of the work you're doing once you cross beyond that efficiency point. And so picking that point to, okay, good enough, build it. We know it's not going to work properly and there's going to be improvements. That's fine. We accept that. And oh, look, yeah, we found out that it doesn't work in these ways. And oh, that's a whole nother thing over here that we didn't consider. So let's re-engineer it. That's actually just the fastest, most efficient way to do things. And that's all I'm really interested in. And I think that can be underappreciated until you've done it a few times. And again, engineers, you're dealing with a group of engineers who want to optimize everything right down to the last millimeter, and they'll spend years doing it if you let them. But and I'm an engineer, so I'm saying that to, I'm disparaging myself in this case. But yeah, I've just observed that that seems to be the most efficient way to move forward quickly, and that's kind of the mentality that we're embracing. and it's not an easy thing on a daily basis. It's a fight, right? To pull it out of their, hands and make us, build this part that they're not happy with yet because it's not completely done. But it really does help us move quick.
Absolutely, I agree. I mean, but coming up with those decisions, it's not that straightforward, I think. I mean, that's what makes you running it differently. And congratulations, by the way, on winning eVTOL Leader of the Year. That's really awesome. I mean, that shows that you clearly run things different, and I like how you actually quote Elon and kind of get inspired by him. You once even mentioned something like he said leading is like eating glass and staring into the abyss. And just
Yes.
a lot of
Yeah.
little things I've noticed from you that you're doing the right things from what I see, and I really like that. I'm popping open here, sharing my screen, just a bunch of different questions that I have. But if anything catches your eye and you want to jump into anything, these are just kind of little snippets of what the question is. But I do want to start here from the top. Was it June 6th? The FAA came out with eVTOL pilot program. First question is, did you guys apply?
So we are certifying under Transport Canada rules. So north of the border in Canada, we have the advantage of being able to um, engage with our civil regulator, Transport Canada Civil Aviation. That has a number of different advantages. One of them is that it's a smaller, kind of more agile organization that is not inundated with, hundreds of these new designs that they're trying to certify. And while Transport Canada does look to the FAA for some interesting ideas, same thing, it looks to EASA over in Europe, the European regulator as well. They're very much their own organization. And so there's a number of different initiatives that start in the US and then TCCA looks at them and goes, "Oh, that's interesting," and then eventually adopts them. That hasn't happened yet in this particular case. So that's very specific to the FAA, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I was actually thinking about that because I know you guys are in Canada, but I wasn't sure if you guys could apply. I was
Yeah, it
really
is a great
hoping.
question. It is a really great
Yeah.
question, and hopefully that answers it.
Yeah, totally answers it. I was really hoping and to find out which industries. I kind of was trying to map out where you guys would win. But I guess you guys can't, so that's fine. Either way, regarding what you mentioned then, you mentioned once that although there's advantages to being in Canada, if you guys were in the US, it would be 10 times easier, and in Europe it would be 25 times easier. I don't remember the context maybe in terms of when you're doing full scale production, so maybe not at this point, but do you guys plan to continue in Canada when you're scaling up, given that you know it would be easier to move elsewhere?
So a little bit of education for your audience. And by the way, great job. I love the channel. I'm a subscriber now, so
Oh,
it's fantastic. Well done. Um, Under Transport Canada Civil Aviation rules, when they type certify an airplane for commercial use, there are bilateral agreements with the FAA. So in Canada, when an aircraft goes through type certification near the end of the process, the Federal Aviation Administration will be involved in said process, but really they will just look at and confirm that Transport Canada has done everything appropriately and that the bilateral agreements can be used in a number of different sort of parallel ways. And then at the very end, they might have a little bit of paperwork to clean up, but essentially, once you get a Transport Canada Civil Aviation certification for an aircraft, a type cert, it is quite simple then afterwards to get an FAA type cert. You don't have to go through the whole process. As I said, it's very straightforward. You can also operate a Transport Canada type certified aircraft under a Canadian, it's called an AOC, Air Operating Certificate, throughout North America. So you wouldn't even necessarily need an FAA type cert to operate in the US under certain conditions. But like I said, it's actually a very straightforward thing. So people get carried away over the Canada versus US and you have to go through the certification process twice. It's really just 1.02 times the effort, if that makes sense.
yeah, that totally makes sense. And then what about production, full scale
You'll
production?
need a production certificate. And once you have a production certificate, basically the regulators say, yeah, you not only have a type certified aircraft, but your production methodologies and capabilities are, meet a certain standard, so you can produce the aircraft consistently and safely. Once you have those two things, and I mean, you can produce them, of course, in Canada and in North America. That makes sense. And we'll look for partners to produce them around the world. Initially, we're going to be producing the aircraft in North America, in Canada first. But we're looking for partners, of course, in the US. That just makes a lot of sense. Setting up, and just being frank with everybody, setting up a production facility overseas is possible, depending on the country. It ranges from relatively straightforward to quite difficult. And so uh, when we think of overseas stuff, we think more of maintenance, repair, and overhaul, MR&O in the business, which can be a significant source of revenue for the company. So when we support MR&O, global mRNA operations. Um, it's a significant source of revenue for us going forward. It could be 30 to 40% of the revenue generated in the business. So we make money in sales, we make money in of aircraft, we make money in training, we make money in mRNA globally as we support the fleet and support companies that help us support that help support the fleet.
Interesting. Well, this was not a question, but on that note, since there's going to be many different avenues of revenue, what do you think is going to be the 80/20, like the 80% of it?
So we'll make a lot of money on the airplanes themselves. Okay, so we have an awesome airplane. We're not going for producing thousands of these things per year like some of those folks. By the way, I mean when you set up a couple thousand aircraft per year production line, it's a couple orders of magnitude more expensive than what we're doing. Our aircraft are going to be in high demand. We'll sell two to 300 of them per year in a very profitable fashion with, and I've talked about this before, the standard sort of 50% gross, 20% net kind of mentality. And that's just on the civil side. On the military side, there's a lot more revenue to be had there. And like I said, the mRNO eventually, that's a longer term play. And there's also the intellectual property sort of basket that we've managed to put together. So what we're doing is very unique. It works very well. It is an extremely interesting way to build an aircraft. So the hover wing in particular, and the technology surrounding that is quite valuable. And so um, potentially licensing that technology out to different companies that can use the hover wing more broadly, we would be interested in. Royalties are another potential source. And then, of course, the one interesting one that people might not be on people's radars is the fact that we just built and flew a large scale prototype aircraft that works really, really, really well. And even that machine itself at the half scale would be one awesome drone on the, either in the military or civilian side. So depending on the mission set. So that could be a potential for early revenue. I'm not committing to anything, of course, and we haven't disclosed anything publicly, so I can't talk about that. But just using common sense, if you have a machine that's already built that is very interesting to a lot of people around the world, just as it is, that could be a really interesting source of early revenue that might surprise some folks.
Very interesting. So I'm gonna jump to this one, the X5. Well, what is the plan for the X5? Because that's kind of like what you're talking about. Maybe could it be a UAV or something?
Absolutely. So initially, we planned it that size for a number of reasons. One, it was large enough to give us some very useful aerodynamic data on the full scale aircraft that we could say, hey, this works at this scale. We got to be careful about how much we believe, but it's going to, technology is likely to work at the full scale size. So it's large enough to really prove that. It's also large enough to force us to adopt, high level aerospace standards and build the company in the right way, right? We need professionals. We need these are not just hobbyists that are putting together a tiny little, 6 foot drone or whatever. This is a real machine that can do a lot of damage and is a pretty powerful beast of an aircraft. And so it forced the company to grow up a little bit, which is absolutely fantastic. And we're really on, we've over the last 5 years developed into a professional aerospace world-class company that's building a full-scale aircraft. So that's pretty awesome, and I'm pretty proud of that. But yeah, I mean that aircraft, the half-scale one, flew way better than we thought, was way more performant than we had anticipated. And so, of course, we have a lot of folks interested in that just in and of itself because of its capabilities. So It is not for long duration sort of surveillance missions, but if you want no infrastructure whatsoever, you want to take off and get your drone somewhere fast. I mean, the thing could, it could be 150-mile-an-hour plus machine with the right engine in it. So beyond visual line of sight, BV loss, easily deployable, fast machine to get somewhere where it needs to go pretty quickly. It would be very compelling. I know I was in the Air Force, right? This could be compelling to do a number of different Air Force, Army, or Navy missions. And so we've had folks interested in that aircraft in the X5 in the half scale prototype itself.
Awesome. So speaking of bringing professionals on, you guys recently brought on Andrea Mocellin. Anything you can share with that, or is everything kind of not
Oh
not?
no, that's publicly, we press release that. First, I'll say anyone that's willing, that gets lucky enough to work with Andrea, he is just such an amazing human being. He is really, really fantastic to work with, professional, courteous. He's just one of the nicest people and most talented folks that I've had the pleasure to work with. We got very lucky. He's a top five in the world sort of talent. He's worked at Ferrari, Porsche, Aston Martin, maybe not Aston Martin, a few of the other major companies, automotive companies, and he's just absolutely a unique talent. Um, he's so good that I mean, some of his changes have actually improved the aerodynamics on in some small ways on the aircraft, right? He's
Oh
not
wow. Can you
trained as
share
an
any
aerodynamic.
examples, maybe?
So a good example is, the way he fared out the intake. For example, now we have more precise numbers in terms of the airflow that we need for a Pratt & Whitney PT6 backed main power plant. And the way he fared out some of the stuff and we haven't released these pictures yet, so soon to be done. But the way he's fared out some of the lower empennage and nose and canard as well has worked out well aerodynamically. I mean, he's worked in high-speed automotive aerodynamics for a long time and has done some aerospace stuff, but he has just a really good eye for it. Generally, it's not always the rule, but something that looks a certain way, tends to fly very well, and he seems to have an eye for aerodynamics. So. Yeah, stuff looks great. He's a world-class talent, and it's improving design. It's a win-win, win-win all around.
Very cool. Speaking of the design, why is the wing forward swept? That seems very unconventional. Is that a trade-off because of the center of gravity or something that you need to hover?
Yeah, excellent question and astute observation both. So, a few things. One, from a practical perspective, it helps to offload the canards very precisely, whilst also keeping the main spar aft of the cabin. So we have full headroom everywhere. That is as actually a secondary consideration. First, while there are some structural challenges, right, it does create a bit of torsional, or I should say, sort of flutter concern from a certain perspective. Uh, it does help with aerodynamics in hover, and I can't say why. It's just trust me on this one. It also helps during transition flight where it has very docile stall characteristics. So the whole aircraft was designed around safety and efficiency. We knew transition was historically the most difficult thing for any company that was building a VTOL to achieve. Horrendous aerodynamics, right? And you saw that with the difficulty of all the major OEMs actually just even getting into transition to forward flight. Billions of dollars spent before Lilium did it, but they did it well. And like I said, it's an interesting design. It still remains so. Joby and Archer both very, very complicated aerodynamics as you have a tilt rotor that tilts forward. Any of the tilt wing folks, it's even more complicated. So transition is a very challenging regime, and the whole aircraft concept actually was designed around transition. So very docile and safe handling characteristics in the stall in and around the stall regime, where the aircraft would likely have the most issues, was important for us. So the forward sweep helps a little bit there, and of course a canard aircraft, the canards will be engineered to stall first, drops the nose, and it's canard aircraft have very benign stall characteristics. So there's some more stuff on the fuselage that I can't really talk about as well, especially the aft empennage. But yeah, those are kind of the main reasons. So to summarize, helps in hover for reasons I can't tell, helps with the center of gravity and offloading the canards, helps with the range there, helps clear the cabin from a main spar that would go right through where people, would normally bonk their heads on it. So it works in several ways.
Very cool. So speaking of the design still, I definitely wanted to get to this one. Are you familiar first with the term biomimicry?
Yep, absolutely.
Were you guys
Yeah.
inspired by the manta-ray or did you use biomimicry when thinking of the design and coming up with the current design? Because it really reminds me of a manta-ray for some reason.
Yeah,
And
so we didn't.
interestingly enough, there's another company, I don't know if you know this, called Manta
Oh
Aircraft,
yeah, I'm generally familiar with almost all of the
eVTOL.
so-called
Yeah,
competition. Yeah.
yeah.
So, um, okay, I get in trouble for speaking a little too frankly sometimes. I think this biomimicry is an interesting thing. So fair enough. Nature does, in fact, um, have a capacity, it seems, to hone in on very, extreme efficiencies. I've read an entire scientific paper on the peregrine falcon and the incredible airflows when it's what's happening when it's going through its dive and the individual shape like it the interesting it has a if you ever look into it in a full dive the peregrine falcon's wings will be swept forward for the first like third and then they'll bend backwards into sort of a teardrop shape that creates interesting vortices that help reduce drag. It's unbelievably the case and right down to the shape of its head and everything. So there is a lot to be said about nature and its unending quest for efficiency, right? The I just recently read an article about the leaves on a certain tree transmitting photons to the photosynthetic core at about 99 point something percent efficiency, which is almost ridiculous to even say. But they do so because there's some sort of quantum effect that allows the various photonic paths to be explored simultaneously so they can reach the core and then sort of through probabilistic means, you choose the right one, right? So yes, it's a thing, um, but I find that a lot of companies will use that as a trick word to make, their designs seem better than they are. I mean, the reality is we've been building airplanes for a long time. We know how to do it. And we know, down to a few percent how efficient various NACA profiles on the wings make sense. And in the end, it comes down to more engineering and aerospace engineering that does to trying to make it look like a bird or something like that, right? If you tried to force that, especially um, there's a scale factor problem, right? There's no birds that are as large as our aircraft. And Reynolds numbers and aerodynamics change quite a bit when you scale up, right? You couldn't make a giant bumblebee fly, right? It just doesn't work. If you scaled a bumblebee up by a factor of 100,000, it just would that mechanism doesn't work at that scale. And it's a fascinating thing in the world. Seems to also prefer certain scales and certain designs at certain scales. And yeah, so yeah, fair enough. I've read all about it, but unfortunately, I can't come up with a good story that we were inspired by some sort of shape. We just did the thing that made the most aerospace engineering and operational sense.
Well, that's a great answer, and honestly, it makes a lot more sense with the scaling factors. I didn't think of that. I just had thought it looked like a manta ray. I saw another company literally had a manta ray looking aircraft, and then I learned more about it, and they're not like stingrays. They even fly in the air. They travel long distances. I'm like, wow, this is a lot like your aircraft. But yeah, nonetheless, great, good to know. Well, you're inspired by real engineering, not animals.
Yeah, we have old school engineers. We got people on the team that have designed, built, and flown their own airplanes, and just a lifetime spent in aerospace. We hire only the best folks. Small and elite team that's actually growing pretty quick right now, but um, yeah, it's exciting to work with world-class talent. It's humbling actually on a daily basis, to be quite frank.
That's awesome to know. That was one of my questions also, how is hiring? How tough is that? But it seems like you guys got it good because if you
Oh,
guys
we've been through
culture of
thousands.
the year, people want to work with you guys, I guess. It's
Yeah, well, again, we get all these awards. I'm very humbled by it all, to be quite frank. It really is a lot of other folks that are smarter and better than I am that are contributing to it, right? Again, if you have a team that good, it's easy for someone to slap a Leader of the Year award onto. But to be honest, like I said, it's quite a humbling experience, and I feel like that award also belongs with the team and not with me, to be quite frank. But yeah, in any case, hiring is always difficult. We have very, very high standards, and so we have a lot of exceptionally talented people apply. We've been through thousands of resumes, quite frankly, and we're sitting at a team size of between 25 and 30 now, so it's still pretty small. We have at least 15 open positions. We have a few thousand applications for that. I mean, hiring is going well, but it's like I said, it's tough hiring when you have the standards that we have and hiring only the best. There are only a few get through the filter. So we encourage everyone to apply, and it's exciting to build that kind of team.
Awesome. Yeah. So switching things up a bit, I'm really curious about Canso Investment Capital, the company that invested in you guys. From what I saw, they have $60 billion under management, all in bonds, and they only own one company, your small company. Why is that? That's
They own a
extraordinary,
few.
I
They
think.
do own a few other ones, but
Oh, okay.
yeah, they're getting into some venture capital. Um, so this is a great success story. I mean, the founder, just an exceptionally talented human. A Royal Canadian Air Force officer, went through Royal Military College as I did. It's like the US version of West Point, but for tri-service, so all three, Army, Navy, and Air Force. And so we both went to the same school, both officers in the Canadian Air Force. He likes to support aerospace innovation. I mean, that's his company's named after Canso, right? An aircraft that flew in service of his country. And so very fortunate. I mean, he has a very strong track record of investing in winners, right? He built his company from a $2 million mutual fund company to having, you said 60 billion assets under management. You can't do that unless you are a visionary, exceptional human being. And John really is. We're really fortunate that, like I said, we got through his filter, and he took his time analyzing the opportunity, and we feel very fortunate to have someone like that who, especially that high quality of an investor on board at a strategic level.
Awesome. So speaking of things that you can't really talk about sometimes, in past interviews, maybe you weren't able to answer some questions. Is there anything today that, a certain date has passed and you can disclose that you've never mentioned yet?
Um, nope, not really. I mean, as soon as that's the nature of a public company, as soon as there's materially important information, we are obligated to disclose it within a couple of days. And so, realistically, when anything happens, it comes out via press release. I can tell you it's an exciting time, right? We're hiring a lot of folks. We're making a lot of very solid technical progress. If you watch our press releases or just come to any of the conferences, you'll see that we don't release just sort of garbage stuff. It's meaningful technical progress. We're making very fast progress, and we're definitely building towards more strategic relationships and partnerships to really make it happen. I'm really excited where we're at, and I think there is a lot of upside, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, definitely. I have a question from a retail investor that was he found out, or I don't know, I have to get more details from it, that GE is possibly inflicting on your guys' fan and wing patent. Do you know anything about that? Or maybe or would they be licensing to you guys?
It's only a matter of time, but I'd have to take a look at it. We have very aggressive intellectual property insurance. So, and generally speaking, those big boys don't really try to steal it. They'll just acquire it, if that makes any sense. They open, especially a veteran-owned company in Canada. I mean, General Electric would get just destroyed in the media if they were doing stuff like that. So they might have done it accidentally. Ducted fans have been around for a long time. So if it's just a ducted fan, I'd have to see the specific example of it. Ours pertains to the opening and closing mechanism. Um, so The answer is I'm not aware of any direct conflicts at this time. It's, we anticipate that that will be a thing that we'll have to fight with in the future, but there are a lot of details that they probably haven't worked out, and we're already into testing. So it's one thing to have a rendering of it, but it's another thing to actually have a machine that works in the real world. So there's lots under the hood that we haven't disclosed yet that it's kind of our secret sauce, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense. So another question he had actually is um, anything you can disclose about partnerships with Rolls-Royce, Bombardier, or I don't know how to pronounce this other company, de Havilland.
Havilland, yeah, it's a beautiful Canadian brand. Um, so I'll say that just let's maybe just discuss what would make most sense for a company like us. We have Bombardier with a full design, build, certify, produce capacity. They're building the Global 8000 right now, series of aircraft. They have Mitsubishi Heavy Industries here in Canada that has a bunch of different arms, but MHI RJ, regional jet, has bought up the Bombardier C series line and is producing, again, full service design, build, test, certify, produce, all in-house, which is pretty amazing. And so there's a lot of strategic partnerships that would make sense to Havilland again with the Twin Otter and putting a lot of money in sort of out in the Calgary area, and investing across a spectrum of different things. So all of those companies would make sense for a company like us to consider partnering with in order to reduce risk overall. That's the best I can say.
Awesome. Yeah, makes sense. You mentioned in your S1, one of the limitations might be other people's patents. So, I guess is going around that by doing partnerships, or would you guys maybe possibly license, or what? Well, actually, the question was really, what have you run into any limitations on other people's patents where you guys, any examples where you guys needed to do something, or currently no, haven't run
That's
in
it. It
anything?
is it
Yeah.
is a great question. Um, I'll tell you, like, there's certain statements you have to put in the S1. And of course, that's one of those generic ones that the lawyers put in, like, oh, if you're developing the tech, maybe you might run into somebody's patent, blah, blah, blah. And okay, sure, fair enough. But it's not really a thing, to be honest. I mean, if it would be different if we were designing our own axial flux electric motor, by the way, um, companies like Evolito, MRAX, a lot of some, Denso, there's a lot of patents out there that really restrict the unique way in which you could innovate, for an axial flux electric motor, for example. That would be probably an example where it would be challenging. So, and that's where you got to thread the needle and dodge the patents and really just who has the better lawyer at that point, I think. It's kind of the game that you play. I think Joby is winding its own motors and building them, and at probably great expense, to be quite frank. But yeah, for us, I mean, we'll partner with all of those really hard tech things. And for example, with motors, we're not as weight critical as the all electric folks that have, 2,500 pounds of lithium ion batteries on board their airplane. So we have a little more engineering flexibility. We can take more robust, proven technologies versus doing everything ourselves because we're painted into a corner and we need the absolute, 1 or 2% else, extra that we can get from designing and building our own thing at great cost. And so when it comes to motors, we'll buy them. When it comes to power electronics, most likely we're down selecting to a couple different companies. And if we can't make it work, that's one where we might design our own power, do our own power electronics. But for the most part, we're not that worried about patents, and infringing on anybody's stuff.
Awesome. Um, Great answer. So, all right, we had only scheduled for an hour. I don't want to take up too much of your time, so I'll just finalize with this last question. To all the retail investors watching, anything you want to share with them, say to them, there is a growing amount of retail investors. We have this Reddit community almost every week now. There's 100 new members. It's growing really fast. A lot of people are new and don't know too much. Is there anything you want to just say to them?
Well, first, I say we're a legit company with a very deep aerospace and operational background. We are making this happen. Like it is the jet is, I can't say it is going to work because then I'll get sued. All indications are that the technology absolutely works and that it is very likely to work at the full scale. And if it does, and when it does, it's a very, very significant, it's going to be a very significant game changer in the space. you can do your own research. Companies at our level that were, with it at a large scale prototype flying in the advanced air mobility space, and that were 18 to 24 months away from having a full scale aircraft sitting on the tarmac. Do your math on what those market caps were back then and can be even now, and then divide that by our market cap, and then you can see a multiple. And whatever your research says, I mean, there's clearly a lot of upside for a company like ours that is making rapid progress and will have a tough, fast, awesome machine that will be quite disruptive when it hits when it starts flying, which is going to be sooner than people think.
Heck yeah, I love that. I actually had a video on that. I think Archer, when they were about at your level, they were sitting at about 500 million market cap, which is pretty much a 10x from where we're at. So
Correct
yeah,
statement.
awesome. Well, thank you so much, Brandon. I'll let you go. Thank you for your time. It was a
Yeah, great. And like I said, I'm a subscriber. Thanks so much for what you do. Really appreciate you, and everyone that follows you is lucky. So they get a little intel earlier than the rest. All
Oh yeah. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
right, thanks for the time. See ya.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. I just want to quickly note that I was really nervous going into this, and Brandon is so awesome. It was a lot of fun. I felt so much better once we jumped into it. And yeah, I just want to say thank you to Brandon. Thank you guys for watching. I'm going to do more stuff like this. This was like my first big interview podcast kind of thing on this channel, and I know I could do a lot better. I'm learning. I'm going to improve in the next ones. This is probably not the last time I'll be talking to Brandon. Yeah, I know I probably should not have screen shared and probably could have better had conversation flow. If you have any advice on what else you think I maybe could have improved upon, whatever it may be. If you're new to this channel, also check out my other stuff. I talk about New Horizon aircraft. Well, I'm going to keep talking about them. So subscribe to the channel and let me know what you think. If you want more of stuff like this, I really enjoyed it and I do want to do more of like this for you guys. So everything I do is free right now. I have no monetization, can't make anything from you guys. So, I just all I ask for is a like and subscribe, and I really appreciate that. And just comment, interact with me, join the Reddit, whatever you guys want. Thank you so much. Until next time, stay thinking, question everything, and peace the fuck out.